Hi. EQ. Let's have a look. This is what an EQ looks like, essentially. This is the EQ on my bass guitar. Now when you're going into EQ, there's like 3 or 4 different things you should have in mind. Don't just go charging in there and think you know what you're doing. You need to have a goal in mind. So you see these 3 peaks I've got here. I found parts of the bass that I like the sound of, so I've boosted them. I've done some quite aggressive boosts on this, 5 dBs, because I just wanted to really give you an idea what it's going to sound like with and without the EQ. So this is one of the things you can do. Enhance the good stuff. Another thing you can do with EQ, take out some of the nasty stuff. So around about here, I found some boominess around about sort of 125, 130 sort of hertz. This is where it's getting a bit farty, a bit boomy, so cut some of that stuff out. You can also use EQ to make something sound completely different. So let's take one of these guitars. Let's take all of these guitars. I'm going to stick an EQ on the entire bus. And I'm going to give it like a telephone effect by sticking a low pass filter at the top, a high pass filter at the bottom, and I'm just going to focus this around I think around 400 hertz roughly. Just, you can see where you are on your band here. You got like 50, 100, 200, 300, 500. So 400 is around about here. I think that's where we hear the most. That's where human beings can hear the most. That's why like it's telephone effect, because telephones push out that frequency more than anything else. I did not do that right. There it is. So you see it's starting to sound a little bit telephony. That's the third thing you can use EQ for. And the fourth use is creating space. And we do this with something called frequency slotting. Frequency slotting is boosting on one of your tracks at a frequency you like the sound of. And I'm going to make a small cut at that frequency on all of my other tracks. What I'm looking for is the part of the bass tone that I want to sing out in the mix. The 600 hertz mark. It's got quite a bit of warmth to it. What I'm going to do, where's my whiteboard? Trusty whiteboard. Oh god, it's covered in shit. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a note of that. 600 hertz. That's what I'm going to use for my bass. Let's go and have a look at the guitars. I'm probably going to find some similar frequencies like that I like between all of the guitars, but I'm going to EQ them individually just so I can find what I like, and then I can kind of boost and cut for my frequency slotting around that area. Also, you should generally always do EQing in the mix, like this. The only reason I'm not is because I want you to hear the changes more clearly. Let's have a look at guitar number 1. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go through, I'm going to find some stuff I do and don't like, and I'm going to cut them out. Don't be afraid to find yourself some EQ cheat sheets, because it's a good way to sort of like guide yourself with descriptors. So I'm looking at electric guitar. This one's only got a couple of options here for adding more clarity and more bottom end. For clarity on the electric guitar, I've got 3 kHz. low end, 125 hertz. Okay, I've done a few things, just experimenting as I go. Guitar without EQ. Guitar with EQ. I'm just going to quickly make some similar changes to the other guitar tracks. These are the EQs I've gone with for the 4 guitars. So I've done some boosts on all of these at sort of, it's all around about the 3,000, between 2,800 and 3,400 hertz on all of them, and I've stuck a little bit of a high shelf on the end for all of them, just bring up some of those more area top EQ nicenesses. I've done a cut on all of them at around 300 to just over 400 hertz. Just found some fartiness in there. Done another boost on all of them, but I've forgotten you. Bringing out a little bit of that low end. And I've done a high pass filter at the very bottom there, just anything that's going into the sub bass frequencies, keep that clear, because I'm going to do some stuff with that later. So that's it with EQ. Now without. Now we're going to do with EQ in the mix. So I'm hoping you can hear the differences there. There's a lot of subtleties in EQ, but when you build a big picture, it sounds great. Now something I am going to do, I'm going to bring up EQ for the bass. I decided on 600 hertz for the bass, for the frequency slime. So I'm going to make a cut on each of these guitars at 600 hertz. That will now give some extra clarity to the bass. Now I'm going to do the same thing in reverse. I'm going to find some frequencies that I like for the guitar, and then I'm going to make a cut in the bass. So this boost here is pretty consistent on all of my guitars. And this is between 2,800 and 3,400. So I'm just going to make a bit of a cut on the bass. So smack bang in the middle is about 3,100. If we slim the band down and then make a more severe cut. And then make a note of that, just in case I need it, which I will. Bass at 600 Hz, guitars 2800 to 3400 Hz. I'm writing these down because when I come to do the drums, I will also be making frequency cuts. And if I was doing vocals, same again. If I was doing synth, same again. It's all about, you take a little bit out of everything and then you give that boost over to the thing that you want to stand clear in the mix. Right, so we're enhancing something nice and frequency slotting, and we're combining them in a sense because I'm finding something nice on my guitars and then I'm using that as its frequency slot. So that in the wavelength and the spectrum of hearing will stand out there. I'm not sure if I'm really making a lot of sense, but I'm trying. Now, I'm no expert. I'm just using what I've learned online. To me, when I've got these EQs turned back on, there's a lot more clarity, a lot more thump in the mix. So that's the basics of it. Now I'm going to quickly run through and do some EQing across the whole drum kit. This can take a minute because I'm actually going to be EQing the kick, the snare, the toms, the overheads individually. So give me a second. Also, don't be afraid to look this shit up, right? Doesn't matter how much of an expert you are, look it up. Look up literally just how to EQ a drum kit, and people will give you advice as to if you want more thump in your kick, boost around this area. If your kick is really boomy and horrible, cut around this area. If you want more like a snap and sizzle on your snare, boost around this area, and use that as a guide. Don't use that as a rule, use it as a guide. So you'll take that frequency range that someone has told you about and just start moving that spectrum around. Like on the snare, if I come into here and someone said, I don't know, actually, let's just quickly look it up. How to EQ drums. Here we are, it's taken me straight to a snare drum. So, it's given me some examples here. 150 Hz, 500 Hz, 3 kHz, 10 plus kHz. 150 Hz, if your snare sounds too thin and needs some extra weight, add a little bit around there. 500 Hz for more body of your snare. The fundamental frequency is around 500s, give it a rounder sound. 3 kHz, add clarity and punch by boosting this area in the upper mids. 10 plus kHz, you don't notice a big difference when you start adding to this snare, but it does lift the sound up a bit. This is just my guidelines, right? So I'm going to go back to my snare. It sounds a bit flat, but then EZDrummer will have other things coming into play, like the attack. It's best when you're mixing, it's best to mix, to EQ in the mix, but I'm just going to do it with the drum solo so you can hear some of the changes. The 3 kHz range. Now, got to be careful here, that's where my guitars are sitting. There's a lot of good sounds around that range where my guitars are sitting, but I quite liked 3600 for giving it some punch. Before I forget, I'm just going to add in my cuts for my other instruments. So the bass, 600. I'm just going to do some small cuts here because I'm going to be doing this across the whole kit, so I want to use really small measurements. But 3100. Oh, by the way, I'm adding in extra points here just by double clicking on a blank space. So you can also click like add band, remove band, you know, to add more, but I'm just double clicking and it's adding a new one in. Anyway, stop talking. We're going to go a little bit higher with the snare. I didn't really want to, I wanted to stay more around the 3000 mark, but just so that guitar can sing out a bit more. I mean, you don't really have to worry quite as much with individual pieces like the snare, because the snare's not constant on the track, it's just there, there, there. So back to this. If a snare sounds too thin, I mean, I don't think it sounds too thin, honestly. sake of experimenting, let's give it a go. Okay, I can hear that. I quite like that. If your drum is too thick, you can fix it by cutting some of the low mids. If it's too boxy, you need to tame the area around 3 to 600. So we've already done a cut around 600. Let's have a little bit of a closer look around there. I see what it means about boxiness. So I'm just going to bring up that cut I had before a little bit, widen that band a little bit, just to account for a little bit of boxiness. Cool snare done. Let's have a look at the kick. So let's add a boost at 50 to 100 hertz. Whoa! All right. That's got some thump. Again, we're just experimenting here. Let's have a little listen to see what happens if I start making cuts around 150 to 250. Just going to stick that in there. That sounds like that's getting rid of some boominess. You have to be sort of careful with the kick drum because you really want a big, loud, thumping in your face kick drum in metal. But at the same time, you don't want it to fart all over the mix. So treat it as you will. Let's have a little listen there. 300 to 600. I can't really hear too much of a difference on that one, honestly. But I do need to make a cut here for my bass. 2 to 4 kilohertz. This is where the snap, crackle and pop is on your kick drum. Next, I need to make a cut for the guitars. I could be doing this all wrong, you know. An expert might come along and say this is a stupid way of mixing and using EQ. But this is just what I do. This is just what I know. Don't hate, educate. The last thing it's saying here is you don't need to do much above 10 kilohertz. That makes me think maybe we could put a low pass filter on it. Go up to around 10,000, stick a low pass on there. That's quite a severe low pass. Toms. Toms quite simple. Cut the mids, add the lows, and sprinkle the highs. Immediately, I found something I didn't like. So I'm making a cut there. We can have 80 to 100 for boosting the floors, 250 for boosting the mid, smaller toms, but not floor toms. Right, I'm just doing a little bit of a general boost down that area. I've increased the bandwidth so it covers more of that area. Sprinkle the highs. Similarly, add the attack by boosting between 5 and 7 kilohertz. Alright, let's have a look at that range. Right, 6,000. That's where we're going. Without. With. I'm very much liking that. So my board's looking at the moment. So we've got bass at 600 hertz, guitars at 2.8 kilohertz to 3.4 kilohertz. The snare is at 4 kilohertz. The toms are at 6 kilohertz. The kick is at 2 kilohertz. I'm going to need to know this just for going back, making cuts, making boosts, blah, 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 blah. Carry on. Let's look at the overheads. Overheads. I'm literally just using this one site. This is the first thing I found, and this is exactly what I do anytime I'm mixing with EQ. Just look up some little bits of do's and don'ts and let it guide you. Don't ever be afraid to look this shit up. No one knows everything. Keep learning. If you only want to use the overheads for the sound from the cymbals, that's what I'm doing here, because I've got everything is pretty well laid out in EZDrummer. Like, there's no bleed of cymbals over like any of the other mics. The overheads will more or less, as again is an electronic drummer. So the overheads aren't taking too much in from the rest of the kit. It's mostly the cymbals coming through. So that's what we're going to focus on. Cymbals. We'll use a high pass filter to cut out everything up to about 500 Hertz. Sounds drastic. Yeah, it does sound drastic. But if other microphones sound great, you can't get an overall overhead sound going. Okay, I'm going to give it a go. So 500 high pass. Okay, so that's completely cut out the kick. That's less of making something sound nice, and that's more just giving it complete clarity. Like, that is now a cymbals. The overheads are just cymbals and a little bit of crackle from the snare. One thing I do need to do though, which I've been forgetting to do, is I just want to go into my EQs and add some cuts, some small cuts. The one at 600 minus 1. I've already got the high pass filter in there, so it won't make too much difference. The guitars were about 3100. Oh, that's a high shelf. I need that to be a band. Take that down to 1. Do the same on the toms. So all I'm doing, tiny little surgical cuts to give space. So where I'm adding 600 cut, that's for my guitars, bass, and then a 3100 cut with a really low bandwidth, just giving my guitars a little bit of space, just tiny changes everywhere. I've already done it for this. I think I already did it for the kick. There's a 600 cut, there's a 3100 cut. That's pretty much my kit done for cuts. Now I'm going to go into each guitar, and I want to give a little bit of space in each of these to my snare. This is going to be proper surgical right there. You see how close these frequencies are together? I'm not sure how much of a difference this is actually going to make, but it's all about making loads of tiny changes. Pardon me, what a rude piece of shit I am. On the bass, I'm going to give some room to the kick. Again, just a tiny dip right there. Now it's just going to be a case of listening, to hear what needs to jump out, what needs to come down. But this is just your basics, how to use EQ, really. There's so much more to paint the big picture that is music. You don't just want to use EQ, you're going to need compression to keep your peaks down. You want to use volume automation. I've realised I've been doing all of this and I'm in a bit of the song that doesn't have the extra guitars. In fact, little bonus lesson here. I'm going to quickly show you how to double track guitars without actually double tracking your guitars. I'm going to take a copy of this section here that is highlighted is the chorus of the song. So I'm going to take a copy of that. I actually have to select the track. That would help. Select in the right place, and that's an exact duplicate there. It's reset my pan there. Would however like to. Now you'll hear this is identical. So if you can't be bothered, or don't have the means to record a double track guitar, you can make a copy of a recorded guitar, zoom in real small like this. We're just going to shift it a few milliseconds. This is it's a little trick for getting your double tracks. So I've really thrown this out now. Actually, I haven't. I still haven't. That still sounds pretty much on it. So let's be very extreme. Let's zoom out a bit more, because you can make it sound really weird and tinny and boxy if you go too far. So you can see it's not right. It's not right. But you literally just want like a few milliseconds. Do you hear the difference there? Let me do that again. That's on it. That's off of it. And it immediately gives you more of like this saturated analog-y kind of loveliness. So I'm just going to do the same with this double track down here, because you'll see actually, here's a good way of explaining it, what we're doing here. These two are actually separately recorded guitars, and you'll see how much of a difference there is in the wavelength, where this one is starting here. I don't know why I'm pointing at the monitor, you can't see that, and that one is starting there, but together part of that is my sloppy playing. This is exactly what we want. Some things to just sort of like go overlapping each other, and it makes everything sound a lot bigger. Grab that, select the track we're copying to, right there, paste. Oh, it's also reset my pan there. Need to make sure I got that. Just gonna give it a few milliseconds out, because it's gonna be these two tracks here. I've gone too far there. That's what I wanted. There you go. Cheap and easy double track guitars. Is that about it? Is that it? Have I done all the stuff? Is that EQ? I think that was EQ. So just to recap. Here's my board. We have enhanced nice elements in the tracks using EQ. We've taken out nasty bits in the tracks using EQ. We have made some space in there using frequency slotting. So we've cut out 600 Hertz for the bass. We've cut 3.1 kilohertz for the guitars, because that's right in between these ranges on the bass and on these instruments. We made some room for the snare, we made some room for the kick. So everything is now got a space. The only way I can really sort of show you what it's done, all those tiny minute changes, is to turn all of the EQs off. You listen to it, turn them all back on. You listen to it. So let's do that. This is all switched off now. All the EQs are switched off. This is what it sounds like. I hope that helps. I hope that kind of shows you the introductions to EQ. So that's EQ. That's what I do. That's what I do with EQ. That's how I use it. Recapping. Enhance the bits that you like the sound of. Cut out the shit that you don't like the sound of. Make some space for frequency slotting. And you can use EQ if you want to make stuff sound like a telephone, or make stuff sound different. I don't know. You just get in there, add some filters, fuck around with it, and that's it. That's what I use EQ for. Just a little bit of here, a little bit of there, and all of a sudden it starts to transform your music. But like I say, you've got like loads of other things to play with, like the panning and volume automation, compression, and all sorts of stuff. This is just a big tool in your toolbox thing. Yeah. Have a play with it. Go on. Get. I've had enough of you. Out of it.